Spacefarer. Welcome to WTUFO. I'm Caleb Mayo. Hope you're enjoying watching or listening. You can support the show now on YouTube or Patreon or Buzzsprout. All three places, Patreon, YouTube, and Buzzsprout, will let you become a subscribing member of WTUFO. You can support us for as little or as much per month as you would like. There might be a couple perks, but the basic idea is you can just help us continue to make the show. This would mean an absolute ton to us. I hope you're enjoying the show. We're having a blast talking to these brilliant people and doing deep dives about the scientific revolution unfolding around UFOs. We're also really enjoying your comments on YouTube and X, so please keep engaging. Tell us more about what you'd like to see or what your ideas about the phenomenon are, and please support us on either Patreon or YouTube or Buzzsprout, or continue to listen for free. That's a fine option too. Hope you enjoy the episode. Have a great day. What the UFO? I'm here with Dr. Michael E. Zimmerman. Michael, it's great to meet you. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here, Caleb.
Thank you so much. Dr. Zimmerman is a professor emeritus of philosophy at the University of Colorado Boulder and the University of Tulane, where you taught for 31 years at Tulane University and served as the chair of the Department of Philosophy and co-director of environmental studies. Michael's work encompasses environmental philosophy, philosophy of technology, integral theory, Buddhism, continental philosophy, Heideggerian philosophy. He's the author of several influential books, including Eclipse of the Self, the development of Heidegger's concept of authenticity, Heidegger's confrontation with modernity, technology, politics, and art, Contesting Earth's Future, Radical Ecology and Postmodernity, and Integral Ecology, Uniting Multiple Perspectives on the Natural World, which you co-authored with Sean Esbjorn Hargens. Is that about correct?
That's good.
That's great. Well, I was telling Dr. Zimmerman offline, I have to confess, I come to your work from a position of relative ignorance. I have not read any of these works. I'm not a Heideggerian, unfortunately, although I'm generally a philosophy fan. I'm not a scholar thereof. And I also wanted to flag that you have a paper from 1997 about alien abduction, specifically called the alien abduction phenomenon, alien abduction in quotes, forbidden knowledge of hidden events. And I understand that a part of your career involves some intersection with John Mack. And is it the case that you are currently working at the John Mack Institute on a volunteer basis, or are you just associated with them in some sort of informal way, or do you just know?
Yeah, well, first there's a second article I wrote in 2003.
Oh, great.
Encountering Alien Otherness.
Okay.
Both of these were published in legitimate venues. They weren't, online things. I mean, they were. But the John E. Mack Institute, Jimmy, as it's often called, now in Rice University, Karin Austin is directing it. And my affiliation's informal, but I know Karin, and we've corresponded a lot. And I worked with John for about a decade, until he died in 2003.
Wow. Okay, well, I thought maybe we could just start with an overview of your career, if that sounds good to you, and then maybe we can dial in specifically on your time with John before we go farther into the rabbit hole. Does that sound like a good way in to you?
And I love the rabbit hole analogy. There's really something to it. It's really hard to get out of it once you're sliding down there. I did for a while. After John died in 2003, I kind of backed off on this. There didn't seem the things I had published didn't gain any traction. Among philosophers are quite conservative, especially around these kind of woo-woo areas, because philosophy is already considered pretty far out. And to same, not unlike what a lot of scientists face. They don't really want to talk about flying saucers or aliens unless it's some abstract thing. Could be out there somewhere, but they never visit us. But I really got interested in it when I was a kid. But let me talk about the John Mack connection. I'm working on a book. That's one reason I'm happy to talk to you about this.
Oh, great.
Proposed title is A Philosopher Considers Alien Abduction, Close Encounters with John E. Mack. Now, the close encounters not only have to do with my interactions with him personally and by mail and so on, because this is back in the 90s and so on. The email was only starting to happen. A lot of letters. but also the remarkable entwinement of our interests over a long period of time, which he remarked upon once when he introduced me in 1996 or 7 at a conference. I was giving a keynote of a conference he organized for experiencers and therapists who worked with experiencers in Rhinebeck, New York. I had been really interested and concerned about the nuclear arms race since I was a kid. And also since I was a kid, I had a real deep bonding sense with nature. One of my memories of being a kid, I must have been 6, and my dad and I walked through this little glade. This was in northeastern Ohio, in a suburb of Akron. And there was a little stream and some trees and flowers. I mean, it wasn't huge, but to me, it was a really beautiful spot. Now, the next time we went there, which was not too long afterward, it had been bulldozed to make room for the first shopping center in northeastern Ohio.
Mm.
So that was kind of my introduction to modernity.
Mm.
Modernity involves destruction of
Yeah.
the natural, what seemed to me innocent natural phenomena. So throughout the rest of my life, until the time I met with John, I was concerned about atomic war, nuclear war, and environment. And I was one of the first environmental philosophers in the United States. I'm talking about the 70s.
Wow.
Publishing articles and eventually teaching one of the first environmental philosophy courses in the country in 1983.
Wow, cool.
2 of my books are about environmentalism. And in the 80s, I published 3 academic articles about the nuclear arms race from a philosophical perspective. What's driving it? Why are we involved in this suicidal activity between the US and Soviet Union? Now, later on, when I became increasingly interested in not just UFOs, but the abduction phenomenon, that's when I discovered that high on the agenda, supposedly, of the visitors, the aliens, whoever they are, was concerned about nuclear war and environmental destruction. So here I was, having been, again, one of the first philosophers to be involved really with both of these in the 70s and 80s, both of these topics. I was anticipating a topic that was of concern to people involved with this alien abduction research and those who report the experience of it. So I was already set up for being surprised by John Mack's involvement in this because of the following. In 1982, in 1981, 82, 83, John Mack and I had taken the Est-Training. Do you know anything about that? This began in California. It was a massively influential kind of human potential transformational seminar taken by millions of people. And many of the ideas and insights like making a difference and so on, these stem from the work that Earhart did. He was kind of controversial in terms of the promotion and the marketing for this. But the workshops themselves, the seminar themselves, are very powerful. Now, John Mack had taken this, and he became appointed to the Est Foundation Board of Advisors. And by 1981, 82, he was really encouraging them to get involved in the nuclear arms race issue and about how to address this, bring it forward. And I took the Est-Training in 1981. The following year, I had a sabbatical. I'm out in Berkeley for 6 months from January to July. And Bert Dreyfus, a philosopher at the University of California, a very well-known student of Heidegger like I was, introduced me to Werner. And so we developed a relationship. And he eventually invited me to give a series of workshops on authenticity around the country. So I was in Chicago, Atlanta, New York, Boston, San Francisco. This is the first time anybody in the organization had been sent out under its name without its own, professional workup. In other words, I was not an employee. I was someone that they liked. Now, one of the reasons that they did this was because this workshop involved the arms race, nuclear arms. I built it in. I can talk about that later if you're interested. Now, Warner sent a copy of this book to John Mack, who was now on the board of directors and of the S Foundation. He read it and he liked it. But he said, well, this guy's just a philosopher. We need action. Well, it's true. He was right. I wasn't doing anything. But so I have these documents in the John E. Mack Institute papers at Rice. All these documents that I exchanged with John Mack are found. So letters between him and me and so on. So I've gained access to these. And so it's helping refresh my memory about this. But John was, so when I'm out in the Bay Area in 1982, a friend and I attended a powerful workshop at Stanford on the nuclear arms race. It got me totally fired up. I founded when I got back to Tulane at the end of the summer, started an organization. It was part of a national organization, anti-war effort. And in 1983 in Washington, D.C., John and I both attended the same workshop given by Search for Common Ground on the nuclear arms race. So that was the beginning of our relationship. Now, meantime, he started doing all this work with Stan Groff, the transpersonal psychiatrist, really, who'd done a lot of LSD research with patients. And I later worked with Groff. I did 2 of his workshops. I published a paper in an anthology he edited in the mid-'80s. And then also we were both, he and John Mack and I got involved with Ken Wilber's work, read his work, published stuff with him and about him. So all this stuff is going on concurrently. Often we didn't know about it. Sometimes we understood and saw the overlap. So in 1992, I found a copy of David Jacobs' book. What is it called? Silent Threat or whatever it is about alien abductions. David Jacobs is a famous alien abduction researcher, historian at Temple University. And the introduction was written by John Mack. Now, this totally floored me because this Pulitzer Prize winning author, a brilliant Harvard psychiatrist, anti-war activist like I was, and blah, 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 all this other stuff I was finding out about slowly. He was into alien abduction. Man, this really knocked me off my feet. And the reason was that meant I had to take it more seriously than I was. I had read Communion in 1988, and that's what got me into this. But I was always holding it off in kind of a, what if space, where I didn't know really what to do with it.
Sounds familiar.
When he started doing all this, that really changed things. So let me just stop there for the moment. And then in the book, I plan to go into all this stuff a lot more detail because it's pretty interesting how all this unfolded. Yeah.
Well, I'll pick the thread up right there. Did you reach out to John and say, hey, man?
I did. I wrote him at Cambridge, at the medical school, and he replied because he had very few allies. There were a couple of really good physicists at Harvard that stood with him and were interested in the topic. But as you can imagine, Harvard was, but anyway, he said, come on up. So in October of that year, 92, I fly up. We hit it off. Then I started visiting many times. I'd fly up there for a weekend or longer. And I got appointed to the board of the organization he founded, Program for Extraordinary Experiences Research, and so on.
Cool.
And so I became his. He and I were. That's another interesting thing. Just as he was getting during this time interested in worldviews and philosophy, and how do you change how people think about things, kind of on a cultural scale, I had gotten really interested in psychotherapy. And I took a class and taught a class at the California School of Professional Psychology in 1982. And later I became appointed as an adjunct professor at the Tulane Psychiatry Department, where I taught a course of 3rd and 4th year residents on existential psychotherapy.
Wow.
Because like John Mack, he and I both had the same idea that something about the way we think, not just Americans, but the Soviets, modern people, were thinking was driving the arms race. It was this dualism. There was all kind of shadow projection going on. So we were trying to step outside of our normal professional bailiwick into another area that provided, at least to me, it seemed, insight that would be useful when I would speak to people. Because I did a lot of presentations about this at Tulane and New Orleans and elsewhere. So there's this crossover effect. So when we met, we were kindred spirits because we were both outside of where we should be in our professional roles. He didn't have any business doing alien abductions, and nor did I, really. But we were both tenured professors. Now, he was, Jonathan, a notch above, but come on, this guy, Harvard professor, brilliant psychiatrist, Pulitzer Prize winner, and so on. I was doing fine at Tulane. I was publishing a lot, good teacher. But we hit it off because we shared this interest, and we also understood that we were on the margin, on the edge here. So we had he was a wonderful man, and I had a great time working with him.
Were you the head of your philosophy department the same time that he was the head of his psychiatry department?
Well, he was never chair of psychiatry.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to remember what roles he did play, but I don't know that he was ever quite chair of psychiatry.
I may have that wrong, but I believe my research suggested that at some point he did head that
it may
for
be.
Harvard Medical School, but I could have it wrong, of course.
Yeah, it's complicated. I tried to find out about it too, but it didn't matter. He was really well known. He founded the Cambridge Hospital. He tried to find ways of working with children and teenagers in the Cambridge community, which was underserved. There was a lot of poor people on the edges of Cambridge and in Boston. So he was really involved in the community, setting up mental health services, which were previously unavailable. And in addition to all this writing he was doing, this guy was incredible. If you study what he achieved in his life, cut short too soon, he was a remarkable person. And he was really fun to be with. He had just the right amount of irony about his own limitations and what he could expect to achieve, with all this stuff. And of course, he did achieve a lot. But he had a kind of impish sense of humor. He was just a terrific personality.
Well, can you tell me a little bit more about the board that you put together, the organization of the Program for Extraordinary Experiences?
Well, John had already set up an organization about psychology, and social change. And PEER, P-E-E-R, Program for Extraordinary Experiences Research, became an element of it. These were both nonprofits, 501k or whatever. And so he set the PEER up because it focused especially on the alien abduction experience as it might contribute to social change. Because, in other words, and it became the main focus of the Center for Psychology and Social Change, because it was really on the plate. One of the things that I want to emphasize, because you're a young man.
Thank you. I'll take it.
Yeah, but you remember nothing about this personally, because I'm talking about the 1980s. This was a terrifying decade around the world, the late 70s and the 80s, because the U.S. and the Soviet Union were on hair trigger alert. And even what some people call the nuclear metaphysicians, the guys who did the strategy studies about this on both sides, were giving 50-50 odds, basically, that nuclear war would happen. It was because it was so tense. It was absolutely gut-wrenching. It's one reason that I think I didn't have any children. I adopted a child late in life, a wonderful young woman. But before that, the idea of bringing forth another person into this potentially nuclear warfare era, it just seemed implausible, or nothing to do. Let me give you an idea about this. I think it was either 81 or 82. ABC put out produced a movie called, what's it called? the day after. And it was set in Kansas, and it was the day after the nuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all about, what happened to this small Kansas town, a university town. I think it was set in Lawrence, University of Kansas or something like that. And of course, for me, one of the most chilling parts of the movie was watching the ICBMs be launched not too far from town. You could see them going up with these contrails. But 100 million people watched that.
Wow.
That's how riveting. Now the film wasn't great. It was good, but the extent of the viewership. How many shows get 100 million viewers? Right?
Yeah, none anymore.
Right. Now, of course, this is pre. There were not that many channels then. Nevertheless, this shows the extent of concern that was in the country, and this is what both John and me to become so involved in working against the mindset, the philosophy and psychology of the modern world that would allow this type of arms race to go forward, an arms race that thread the whole future of our species.
And simultaneously, you're doing environmental philosophy, so you're probably keenly aware of the biodiversity loss that is staggering the world and sweeping across our beautiful planet. So it isn't really a question, but a semi-funny but dark thought that occurred to me is that both of those horrible dangers are still alive and well.
Yeah, that's right.
In the 2020s, but we don't freak out about them anymore.
Well, I think what happened was once the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed, then both sides, the Soviets, now Russia and us, started making treaties about nuclear weapons because there was no point in us being enemies anymore. Communism had failed. The ideological battle between capitalism and communism was pretty much over. So we drew down the weapons. Now, there's still thousands, but at one point there were close to 50,000, including tactical nuclear weapons.
Okay, so is your read on the situation that we actually are significantly better off with regard to nuclear war? I've heard people describe this as the most dangerous thing we never think about.
Yeah, I think that's right. Both Pakistan and India have nuclear weapons, and they've come really close to fighting a nuclear war. Now, one of the good things about nuclear weapons is that if both sides have a nuclear weapon and both can deliver it before their launch capacity is taken out, then you really can't fight the war. I mean, so the India could take out Islamabad, and then the Pakistanis could take out New Delhi, but we're talking about 50 million dead people.
So you get the stable deterrence of mutually assured destruction.
That's right. See, there's a good outcome of that. But nevertheless, here we see North Korea getting nuclear weapons, including apparently they're developing a nuclear armed submarine. It lurk off the coast of California, and the regime, North Korea, doesn't seem like, I don't know what to make of it, if anybody understands what's going on there. So nuclear war remains. The Soviets are rattling the nuclear saber around this whole Ukraine invasion and so on. Yeah. So it's still out there, but it's not like it was.
Okay.
I think the idea of a massive intercontinental exchange of missiles, that just doesn't seem a plausible situation or anything, but you never know.
And this is also a bit to the side of what we're here to talk about, but as an environmental philosopher, do you feel like we've made progress in the last 50 years thinking about preserving more land for wilderness, rolling back some of the destruction, or at least slowing some of it down? Or are we galloping apace with destructive tendencies that we still need to rein in?
I think there's a lot of good news. There's this guy named Bjorn Lomborg, who's, I believe he's Norwegian or Swedish environmental sociologist. I'm not sure exactly what his academic background is, but a decade or 15 years ago, he started publishing. It was quite controversial from the point of view of environmentalists, but he was showing these graphs and charts showing declines of this negative thing and increase of this positive thing. And so that there have been a lot of good things that have happened in terms of environment. People are much more conscious of it. But nevertheless, it's because of the size of our population. We're approaching, probably make 10 billion people eventually. And the desire on the part of everyone to have a Honda, and an iPhone and all the good stuff that you and I like, right?
Picket fence, maybe.
I mean, we is it right for me? We're in the wealthy country, tell these developing countries, now you shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
You shouldn't, it's totally hypocritical.
Yeah.
So then you part of the development has been, if you study this, and it sounds like you're involved with it or aware of it.
I'm very interested.
Yeah, eco-modernism is a phrase where how can we develop greater wealth as necessary, even, for example, for dealing with climate change. Wealthier countries will deal with climate change better than poor countries. Well, therefore, the poorer countries need to develop, even though that will increase the carbon dioxide some, it will provide them with greater, greater funds and training and expertise necessary to combat the consequences, to mitigate climate change in some way.
That's a good point.
I've been encouraged by a lot of development. Some things are still awful. I hear about the plastics. My father was in plastics. He had patents in plastics and so on.
So it's his fault that we're all eating a credit card every week.
That's right. Well, it's but I'm not pessimistic. I think that if we don't have nuclear war, if human beings are going to muddle through, things are going to get better. We're going to figure things out. We're going to get more and more effective with solar. I don't know about wind. That's just such a difficult thing to do. And we just can't yet envision the breakthroughs, especially I suspect made possible by AI in the next 5-10 years. So I'm hopeful. I used to be really much more anxious about all this, but I've grown to be, we're human beings will persevere. Now, I should add to this, by the way, and you've been following this too, the population collapse we're experiencing. We went up so fast and so high in the 20th century that now what they call the sigmoid curve, those curves that go up eventually start stopping and then going down. So the only place in the world that seems to be still population productive is sub-Saharan Africa.
Wow.
Whole of Asia is way below population.
Wow.
Same thing with Europe. The United States, if we didn't have immigrants, we would have population loss here.
Yeah.
And so there's just going to be fewer people and probably with cleaner technology. So hopefully the next 50 years will not be what they had been projected 50 years ago.
That sounds right to me. The only techno wrinkle I think AI will help introduce is I think will probably radically extend lifespan. So if our birth rate plummets, but we're living to 200, that will change the math in ways I don't really understand yet.
This is an aside. Think about this though. Who would want to live to be 200, right? I mean, if you have to work
199-year-old.
If you have to work for 150 or 60 years, imagine how about marriage? Can you be married to someone 100 years? Think about this. I mean, are we cut out, our institutions and so on cut out for this kind of thing? Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole nother, but it's an important
side
point.
Shout out to the polyamory people who think they have an answer for the marriage question, at least.
Well, some people say at a certain point you can have 5-year re-ups.
Yeah, there are all kinds of different ways to love. Okay, well, that took us pretty far afield, but I guess nudging back toward abduction, you mentioned that nuclear threat and environmental degradation, these are topics that have come up in many abduction narratives over the years,
yes, right.
Not least the aerial school incident in Zimbabwe, where I believe John Mack spoke to some kids who told him this explicitly. And so I'm curious about how that played a role in your study of abduction, and I'm curious, were you and John still talking and thinking actively about alien abduction experiences up to the time of his death?
Yeah, well, but I adopted this child in 1998.
Okay.
My wife and I, and so I didn't get to see him as often, but
Mhm.
we did. I did still fly up to Boston. Went to a big conference in San Francisco in 1999. He was at this weekend. We kept up, and in fact, in the year 2000, 2001, I was corresponding with him about how to get Ken Wilber on board with taking. This is the big transpersonal philosopher. Get him on board taking alien abduction more seriously.
Mm.
So it continued, but it continued in somewhat different ways. Now it's important to keep this in mind. I think I wrote an essay about this on the. I'm a member of the Society for UAP
USP
Studies.
studies.
Yeah, and I have several blog posts in the blog section of that.
That's
Uh,
great. We're big fans of SUAPs, and we spoke
yeah, so
to
they're
Dr.
coming
Safone.
out with a bunch of essays in the second issue of the journal.
Oh, great.
I've seen the titles; it's very impressive. But one of the essays I wrote, really the theme was the entwinement of UFOs, AI, and nuclear and AI and nuclear war. I guess it is. Yeah, that's right.
Mm.
Nuclear. Because think about 1947. This is what this is Roswell, uh,
Mhm.
uh, and this is also the time when right after World War II, that so many UFOs are being reported already in 43, 44, 45. Not only these these Foo Fighters in Europe and in the Pacific theater,
Mhm.
and also the uh, development of nuclear atomic weapons going on in the United States. UFOs are flying over all those facilities. Hanford, New Mexico, the Sandia Labs, of course, Los Alamos. Uh, I mean,
Mhm.
and people saw these, including the scientists. No one knew what to make of these. Then you have the 1947 uh, Roswell incident. And then in 1952, this is the big one. 1952 saw perhaps the most intense scale of UFO overflights in this country, at least
Mhm.
ever. I don't know if
Mhm.
it's ever been matched. There's a great book that came out a few years ago by Bruce Maccabee, who's a PhD in optical physics who worked for the Navy for years. And he did a very, very fine grained analysis of the whole thing because on two consecutive weekends in July of 52, squadrons of UFOs were flying over the U.S. Capitol, chased by planes, tracked on radar, seen from the ground. Um,
Yeah,
and
people can look this up as the 1952 DC UFO flap.
yeah, it's quite. And I get this: 3 months later, we detonate the first hydrogen bomb, November 1st.
Really? I didn't
Iron
know
Mike.
that.
Yeah. So it's as if they're just giving us a reminder that whoever these beings are concerned
Mm.
about us. There's something about this. This raises the whole extraterrestrial thing. It seems implausible to me. These beings are from other galaxies or planets and stuff. I mean, they share our DNA insofar as we can tell. Well, it's because there's something like a hybrid program that goes on that somehow we're able to mate in some way. So maybe their concern about nuclear war and environmental destruction has something to do with the fact that they, in some way, inhabit this planet with us.
You know what? I wanted to talk to you about that. So let's just go there now. I think maybe a good place to start would be to just ask about your overview of the phenomena, like what your general impressions are. It sounds like from what you're saying, you favor a theory that these non-human intelligences somehow share Earth with us, and that cohabitation stretches back into history. I sometimes call this the techno fairies theory personally, because I like this intersection with John Mack's, Jacques Vallée's Past
Right.
Patagonia, and I'd love to explore that with you.
Great
Uh,
book.
yeah, really, really interesting book that sort of draws connections between folklore stories and the contemporary abduction phenomenon. And I guess I want to ask, what's your general impression of the phenomenon before I muddle my words any further.
Well, I mean, I really like Vallee's work. I think he's really onto something. There's some kind of a control system. One could argue that the UFOs are about it, and that this is apparently ancient. People have been reporting in various cultures around the world over history. Their beings come from the sky. And the chariots of the gods, all this stuff, right? Now, I remember when Chariots of the gods came out back in late 60s or whatever. Big, the New Age was really getting going, and his was a big, Von Daniken was a big contribution to that. But
still a fun read. People should check it out.
It is. But now, I'm not saying it's impossible that beings are here from other worlds, other solar systems or whatever, but it just seems just to get here. I don't want to go into all that. You're familiar with it, as are many of our listeners here. So there's a lot of people now trying to. Are these beings coming back in time? Are these are we their ancestors? Are they coming back because they need fresh DNA or something? There's another whole approach. Michael Masters does this kind of thinking about it. So where do I come from? Where's my view about this? In the research I did, and man, I'm a researcher. I mean, I read in the late 80s and through the 90s. I read a ton of UFO books, and especially alien abduction books and papers. And I've begun doing all this again after 2017. The New York Times stories that came out that reinvigorated a lot of interest in it. So I'm back in the saddle again. I'm sliding back into the rabbit hole because it's such an important topic.
Yeah.
There's a lot of important things we should pay attention to, but this is one that everyone should have some kind of thought about because what if? And so, if you go back to the early 50s, there were all these close encounters, a lot of them taking place in California. Some people would say, of course. But these are the people who report these. Some of them seem to be in it for the publicity, but others are quite serious about it. They would have encounters with these Nordic types or these strangely beautiful space women and so on, and flying saucers, and that one of their main messages was you cannot engage in nuclear war. You have to change your behavior and so on. So what these people in the 80s and 90s are telling John Mack is a version of that. So that it's not something new, but it became much more intense. I was just listening recently, in fact, this morning, last night, to Karin Austin, the woman who's a director of GEMI, Johnny Mack Institute at Rice. She was being interviewed on Neon Galactic, and she was talking about this and about how this real intensification of all these encounters, 70s, 80s, and 90s, have really dropped off. It's not that none of them occur, but they're much more infrequent. So there was massive interaction between whoever these beings are and us. How literally are we to take them? This is something that John Mack really wrestled with. In his first book, he was he did have a tendency to be less cautious with his representation of the ontological or reality status of these beings. In his second book, Passport to the Cosmos, he was more careful in trying to address the ontological question, trying to find a third way between a mere fantasy and absolute straight-out physical reality, some third, something about the collective unconscious, or some other way in which these entities could materialize and then dematerialize and so on. But one of the reasons he got in trouble with Harvard was he had this 16-month inquiry, 94, 95. I think it didn't help that he was going on a bunch of TV talk shows about the topic. And as a Harvard professor, I think that med school just, couldn't take this. Eventually,
they hated it. Yeah.
Eventually was exonerated, but I remember going up there and talking to him about it. He shared letters. I mean, I've got information about what was going on. It's just terrible. Now there's a great biography of him called The Believer. They came out a couple of years ago.
Ralph Blumenthal.
Ralph Blumenthal. He and I've talked to him about it. We've corresponded. It's just really well done, I thought, and really got a sense of who John is. But you might, and I would have given it a different title. I would have called it The Seeker.
Mm.
Because and that's where there's this commonality between John and me. We were both seekers. Mm. We were dissatisfied with the metaphysics of modernity, the death of God, the evacuation of all spiritual content from the universe. It's just matter and motion. Everything really is completely meaningless. And we humans on our little planet, we make up stories and stuff got to tell your children because otherwise it's total nihilism. And I mean,
no wonder you were teaching existential psychiatry.
Yeah, I mean, it's and that's one reason that Carl Jung, a great psychiatrist, got interested in flying saucers, because their circular shape reminded him of the mandala, and that he thought this UFOs were in a way a kind of symbol of the need for wholeness. Mm. But modern people were being fed thin gruel. 19th and 20th century, and we needed something else to inspire us and to help us overcome the types of animosities which were bred by a lack of transpersonal connection among people.
Jung's work is weird. I would flag this for people. You could check it out because it's relatively short, but it does feel like he's grasping for symbolism and almost maybe doing the opposite of what you just mentioned John Mack did, which was like leaning so far into the symbolism that he was ignoring the physical reality.
Right. Well, he just didn't want to come down on it. Mm. He was an avid student of it, it turns out. I mean, he was constantly reading this stuff.
This is Jung.
Yeah, he read all the reports. I mean, he was avid, but again, he had a reputation to deal with. Right?
Sure, yeah. And there's this great phrase you use in your 97 article or paper, social ontology, which it strikes me as the thing that Jung and Mack were pressing against, and I'm sure you've pressed against in your career. The collective impression of the way things are.
That's right. And I remember when I went to college, I was raised Catholic, and so I believe in God and all this stuff. I still do believe in an ultimate source, given different names, but the universe is just, this is I'll tell you what, this is the philosophical question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Mm. Now, that is it. What is all this about, right? Billions of years old, we show up. So the stories people have come up with, of course, to try to make sense of this are varied. But the story we came up with, I haven't been satisfied with. And I think a lot of other people are not satisfied with the adequacy of the story. It leaves out me.
Satisfied either. And I'm not really that satisfied with the current proposed alternate theory that consciousness is fundamental, although I find it intriguing. I'm just as confused about that. Like, why would there be a conscious substrate to the universe instead of no conscious substrate? And
that's right.
Gives rise to it.
Yeah. So there's a lot. Now I'll tell you what. This is an interesting thing you're bringing up here, because back when I was in graduate school, I mean, you just wouldn't believe the crap that people believed back then. I'm talking about serious philosophers.
Really, like what?
Well, let me give you an example. Let me put it out this way. Okay. Philosophers don't do scientific research. We don't have labs. So we kind of rely on what physicists and biologists and stuff tell us about, because they're the ones who are doing the heavy lifting there. And now there's such a thing as philosophy of science, which may criticize methods or whatever. But I'm telling you, back in the 60s and 70s, when factory farming was really getting going, and just horrific animal research, I mean, where animals were subjects of medical and other kinds of research. There's one infamous practice called the Drey's method. Are you familiar with this?
No. Is it about vivisection?
No. Well, it's not vivisection, but it's similar to it. This was something done by not pharmaceuticals, but people in the cosmetic industry. to determine whether or not a product would be experienced as creating a rash or some kind of untoward consequence if you put this stuff lotion on or whatever. What they did was they would strap rabbits into a headlock and basically remove their eyelids and then drip just drops of this stuff into their eyeballs over a period of time and to see which eyeballs rotted out or if others, what were they. And,
oh my God.
And then so the scale of, and here's the even more startling thing. The scientists at National Institute of Health and these other places where these medical experiments and so on all were going on, and also in factory farming, all goes back to Descartes and his student Malebranche, who concluded that animals are like machines. They have no interiority. They're like zombies. They're just, and that the screams they make when vivisection is going on is equivalent to the sounds that rusty gears make when they grind together.
Right.
There's no feeling, no pain, no suffering.
Yeah.
And this went right up into the 1970s and 80s.
God.
This belief system on the part. Now, the 19th century saw the rise of the humane movement in England, and it came over here and so on, because anybody with pets and who works with animals know that they feel pain.
Yeah.
That's an abstraction.
Of course they do.
It's a metaphysical dualism. There's consciousness and everything else is unconscious, just humans. But this is what I was taught to believe and taken for granted in graduate school. Now it started to change. People in the mid 70s, people started publishing things like The Question of Animal Consciousness, and so on. So and that eventually in the 80s led to a real change in how we treat animals in experimental circumstances. But think about, just consider that. This is modern times, people doing this. This the late 20th century, people involved in this kind of activity, just taking it for granted that it was okay. Because they had a social ontology. It was socially agreed that these animal entities do not feel pain.
It's the thing that this brings up for me is an interesting question about how if these UAP turn out to be non-human intelligence and we enter into some kind of like diplomatic relationship with them, one of the first things we're going to want to talk about is the practice of abduction. And I've been just noodling a little bit on the thought experiment of how to frame a mutual agreement in such a way that would exclude humans from abduction, but retain for us the ability to say abduct a dolphin and implant a chip.
Yeah. They are, well, let's face it, animals are, that's such a good point you're making. I think there's been an explosion of research the last 50 years. And now we're realizing that plants are sentient. They're intentional. They're super smart. They create bespoke chemicals on the spot that are necessary to fight off this or that. And it goes all the way down to the cellular level. Cells apparently change their behavior based upon what they're encountering. So that life from the very bottom stratum of life is intelligent, intentional, probably has some kind of meager experience.
Sure. Yeah.
So this is a great enrichment of our appreciation of planet Earth, and also one which a cautionary tale about how we treat animals and plants, for that matter. Down here in New Orleans, where I live currently, there are these things called elephant ears. These are massive plants which have these heart-shaped leaves. They're gigantic, and their trunks, these green, can be this thick. Now they can start to overwhelm stuff. You can't even walk past them. So I get out there with my, not a machete, but a big knife, and I just chop off one of these limbs. It could be 4 or 5 feet long, and after reading more about this recently, I'm saying, man, what am I doing? This gotta hurt, and yet we have to eat. And so anyway, but here's the thing. It is outrageous to us. Almost everyone who reports an abduction. Karin Austin was talking about this. Who reports one of these things? It seems like just an incredible violation. Partly because we are supposed to be at the top of the food chain. This is what you might call anthropocentric humanism. You know, we're the top rational beings around. Now, you might think about there's some critters off in Alpha Centauri or another galaxy. Well, but they're not here. And for all we know, we are the top of the chain in the universe, right? And to have another creature come in, these bug-like creatures who do all these horrible things in some ways to us, it's just, this is the origin of what John Mack and others have called ontological shock, just metaphysical breakdown, where you, and I've met people at John's, at Pier when I was up there, and experiencers, and also in Houston, I went over there once to meet with experiencers and the people working with them. Those who had relatively recently got in contact with their experience, were calling it, you know, it was like they were in shell shock because their social ontology had been destroyed. The story that story that we tell ourselves about what's real and the human place in nature was just, it was like having the rug just pulled out from under them. Now, so that seems to be a universal experience. Now, the shocking thing about reading Whitley Strieber's Communion, which I read in 1988, which is still a great introduction to all this stuff, was he was complaining, to one of them, you have no right to do this. And the reply was, we have a right. Now, he said that. What a devastating reply, right?
Yeah, that's the scariest sentence in the book.
Right. It's like if my dog, I had a dog once, really loved my dog. But, I'd hate to take him to the vet, get shots and all this stuff. And the poor dog, he didn't want to get in the car.
Sure.
My cat hated it. When we brought the cat cage out,
oh boy.
And we say, look, it's just for your own good. I mean, we have to do this. I hate doing it. But now these critters don't talk to us like that very much. The ones abducting us. We're not pets. They don't love us as we love our pets. And maybe that something like love does. They show some of that later on. But when those abductions start, they're coming into your bedroom and floating you through the window and taking you off some craft and do these experiments on you, or take your eggs or semen. It's hard to imagine. So then the question becomes, what is it all about? And by the way, I want to show you, have you seen the cover of his new book, Strieber's new book?
Yikes. No, I haven't.
Yeah, this is the cover of the new book. It's called The Fourth Mind. We should talk about this some.
That is even more deeply unsettling than the original somehow.
Right. Now, this is exactly the same face, but without the black film over these huge eyes. Now, I was seeing that book in 1988 with big black eyes. And I saw that I was in a JFK getting ready to fly over to Europe. I wanted to get something to read, so I go toward this bookstore in the airport, and wow, there's this book with this cover on it. And I was like, whoa, what is that? It was like I had seen this before. I have never experienced in any venue of seeing a painting or a picture where I had that shock of recognition.
Wow.
Like, what is that?
Yeah.
That's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have reported that experience of seeing that cover for the first time.
Yeah, that recognition.
Yeah, which suggests that, as Whitley says in his previous book, Them, he says his abduction hasn't been really widespread, but little reported. Even though hundreds of thousands of people report it. I mean, what if there are tens or hundreds of millions of people who have been abducted? The same thing happened with Gary Nolan. Do you know who he is? Yeah, he's an
immunologist, but famous UFO.
Famous, a Nobel laureate quality. He's been doing all this work. Well, he in the Stanford Alumni Magazine, I think it was last year, they did a long story about him. And and think about this. Think how far we've come. Of course, this guy's untouchable at Stanford. There's hundreds of patents and all this stuff he's doing. So he says, when I saw the cover of Communion, I almost fainted because that's a creature I saw in my bedroom when I was 5.
Wow. He hasn't talked all that much about this.
It's out there.
He's mentioned it a couple of times.
Right. And And then he's done all this work with people who report radiation or other ill effects of encountering aliens. So who are they? What do they want? I mean, Whitley Strieber, who's I've read many of his books, and I think one reason I like him is because he's intellectually playful in the sense he tries out different hypotheses. He's not wedded to one thing. He often says, well, I think it's in this most recent book. He says, when it happens, you believe it's totally physical. It's like reality. Then could it be an incredible virtual reality experience that these critters can generate? I mean, think what they're able to do with these screen memories. They can show up as owls, or they can show up as deer, and we experience them not as what they are, but as something else. And sometimes people see that disappear, and you see the real face come through. Well, if they can do that, what else can they do? Right? One of the things that we're working on now, especially with AGI, artificial general intelligence, is the capacity to create experience machines where you could move in and spend the rest of your life in a machine where your experience would be 100% real to you, but really is being generated by your brain interaction with a computer. It's sort of like the Matrix. I mean, so we don't know, all right, what, could there be some literal physical? Yes, I think that's possible. In fact, in this most recent book, he says they're flesh and blood. Now, it's pretty rare for him to come right out, because he's often doing this cautionary, that he's a straight out, they're flesh and blood. He was raped, is how he's now talking about it, when he was first abducted and so on. Very dreadful stuff. Sometimes he calls them horrible, ugly creatures. But other times he speaks about he had an affair with one of these female creatures, whom he describes as kind of ugly, but there's a powerful bond of love and affection somehow, which with her, and this went on for years. And he says in The Fourth Mind, he says, if she were to come into my life again, I'd greet her with open arms. So he has a very complex view. And then the question becomes, what do they want? Do they want DNA? Because theirs is wearing out, right? Is that why they're creating hybrids, if they are? He says he thinks they've tried. The ones he's seen haven't worked very well. So maybe the process maybe that's failing in some way. He seems to think. But then what are they about with us? Well, one of the things he's claiming in this book, in The Fourth Mind, one of the reasons that it's a cool book, Whitley's such a good writer. He wrote all those good sci-fi horror books and stuff. He's really good at that. So it makes his reading his work enjoyable. He tells a really good story. But what if they want is our capacity for surprise, for experience, novelty, emotional, the whole panoply of stuff that goes on in being human. And this is where he comes up with this fourth mind idea. This is the first half of the book is on the fourth mind, and the second half of the book is how do we get some of this fourth mind back? Well, what does he mean by the fourth mind? Well, if there are critics reading this book, they would say, look, you're basing your account largely on a document found on Reddit. Right? Somebody anonymously published this, 15, 20 page document on Reddit he was purporting to be, he or she, a scientist who was involved with assessing, evaluating, examining, cadavers of these graves. And they were describing, this guy was describing how the graves work, what they look like. And one of the things he discovered is that they don't have a bilateral brain, but a four-part brain. All right. And so when he's talking about the fourth mind, he's talking not only about a four hemispheric mind, a brain, but also about the capacity. This is part of what Whitley Strieber is proposing, that what these creatures have been able to do is to rise out of the three-dimensional framework in which we operate with time experience as a stream, of, one thing after the next. We don't really know the future,
Mm.
what surprise is about.
Mm-hmm.
You never know what's going to be on the TV or on headlines or online or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
or in your own life, but that they have now developed the capacity to see past, present, and future all at once,
Mm-hmm.
all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing new. And they're in a kind of state of existential burnout because their life is completely meaningless. There's no novelty.
That's
There's
interesting.
Nothing to look forward to because they've already seen what's coming.
Bored aliens.
Bored aliens, and it says. Now, the way in which you describe this is this. Imagine you're a fisherman, and fishermen do this. They can watch a fish coming downstream, and they know that there's something down there they don't know about yet. A log has fallen across, or there's something else going on, or there's a bigger fish that might eat them. And they can also watch the fish as it comes down the stream. So they're seeing, laid out for them, they're seeing past, present, and future for this fish.
Okay.
Maybe quite a way.
Yeah.
Now, what if they are like, so that they're standing outside of the fish stream? The fish is embedded in it. It has none of that experience.
Yeah.
Every moment as it's flowing, something new shows up for it. It doesn't know what's downstream, but we do. Now imagine these critters having that three-dimensional past, present, and future grasp of our reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that would include our own personhood. So that in looking into our eyes with that eye lock, which is so often reported by experiencers, is so powerful. Once they lock eyes with you, you're done. They can see it all. They see your whole life, your past, present, and future, in a way that we can't imagine. But so that they go deep into us, into our own selfhood, just like we do with our pets. We see we can, especially if you have pets or dogs and cats live very short lives. and when I go back to my dog Boudin, which is a kind of Cajun French sausage. I love the name. He was a great golden retriever. But we loved each other. I would look into his eyes, and at times, he would make these loving sounds. You know how dogs are, licking me and so on. And I knew he had something to communicate. He couldn't do it. He had to do it with his body, and so on. So I had a great compassion for him and sympathy for him, and I could tell that he had this yearning to say more, to express more his affection. He lacked the language for that. But I also could see his whole lifetime. He did not have a sense of mortality the way humans do. And what a burden, right? Mortality, awareness of it. William James talked about this. And this is the thing that I did with Heidegger. Heidegger's idea of authenticity is this. To be authentic, you have to own up to your mortality. You have to, what he called being toward death. Now, and death is not something out there. It's always here.
It's part of your experience.
It's our finitude, our limitation. And that if you're unable to grasp that, to own it, in fact, the German word for authenticity is Eigentlichkeit, or Eigen means own, my own. So being authentic means owning up to what it means to be human. Now, one of the things that these critters have discovered, apparently, is that if you really rise up above the three temporal dimensions and can see the whole thing, and Einstein talked about the block universe. Everything is past, present, and future has already happened. It's all there. There's no past goes away. It's still there, and the future is already out there. It's just a matter of experiencing it as it unfolds. But so I can see everything about my dog. I can see he was born, he's going to die, and he's unaware of it. And so I have this affection for him and for other life forms because I can grasp something about their condition and have an appreciation for them. But he and I could not have a conversation about that. And they can find it really hard to converse with us, these critters, whoever the visitors are, as Strieber calls them. They can't talk. they don't have the apparatus for it.
Physically, verbally, you mean?
Yeah, that's one of the things that came. Now, by the way, this Reddit report is really impressive. I mean, whoever wrote it was clearly a scientist.
Thank you. I haven't read this. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, it's at the end. He publishes it in the end of this book.
Oh, okay.
So it was not some cartoonish thing. It was a serious document. And whoever wrote it, if they were making it up, pretty impressive making it up. But one of the things that Strieber said that made him realize that the reason he gave it credit was that this guy in the Reddit paper said the way in which the visitors, get rid of waste is through their skin.
Mm.
And he had never mentioned this in his other books. And so when he read this in this Reddit document, he said, well, that's important to me because this is an indication that someone has found this out independently in working with these entities.
Mm.
So they show up here. Why are they showing up here? What do they want? He describes them as predators.
Mm.
This is an aspect of them. But they also, what is it they have to give to us? You see, what do they want from us and what do they hope to give us? And this is what his first book is called, Communion.
Mm-hmm.
And he originally titled it Body Terror. It was so
it's
hard.
that too.
One of them, he remembers one of them asked him, what can we do to help you stop screaming?
Yes.
So I could totally get that, why he would be like that.
Yeah, the skin excretion also explains the musty smell of the environs.
Yeah.
Or could potentially.
Yeah. But let me stop because I've said a lot of things here that you might want to
pick up on. Yeah, there's so much going on. One thing that comes to mind is this. I love your analogy of the stream and looking into the world of the fish. And it made me think of that famous David Foster Wallace joke about the young fish talking to an older fish, and the older fish says, "How's the water?" And the young fish says, "What's water?"
What's water?
Yeah, because they don't know.
So that's true for us.
Right.
We swim in our world as if this were reality, but it's reality as it shows up for us.
Right. And so that took me to I think you laid out the temporal dimension of that really well. Like, how would we talk to a being that could see before and after?
Yeah.
But there's also a potential spiritual element to this, which is, if we are more than our physical bodies, if consciousness is in some way ethereal that we don't currently understand, it may be very difficult for us to speak with beings who understand that on a deeper level. And we're currently only at the very beginning of our exploration, if that world is as real as to some it seems it may be. And that gets me kind of close to a question I thought might be fun, but may only be cute, which is I think we're both familiar with, and everybody in this field is well aware of, the scientific community's reluctance to engage with spiritual and extraterrestrial investigation. But I wonder if you think there's a reciprocal hesitance coming from the world of spiritualism and mysticism, and you might say woo, I guess. It sometimes seems to me like that world resists being sciencified. It resists interrogation from the world of science. And two linguistic ways in which it does this are one, people will say, I tried to think of a rational explanation for something that happened. And then another one is they use like the materialist world versus the spiritual world. But it seems to me like if these spiritual ideas are factually accurate, like if ontology, like objective ontology, is bigger than we currently understand, then it could be rational to consider spiritual entities or your spiritual reality, and it could in some sense be materialist to explain those entities and realities just in ways we don't currently understand. It would require a material, literally, that we haven't found. So that was a bit of too much, but did it bounce in any interesting ways for
well,
you?
yeah, I mean, one of the things that, and this became something that John in his first book and second book emphasized, was that many experiencers, not all, but maybe 75 or 80%, end up qualifying their initial assessment of the experience as just being bad and wrong and a violation. Now, they never really get rid of that, but their experiences they grow spiritually. Their capacity for care, they become more interested in environment and well-being of animals and other people, and they also acquire all kind of paranormal abilities in many cases. The usual, a variety of abilities that they hadn't had previously. So one way in which Karin and John Mack and others who worked with us a long time, and Whitley too, is that in some way we might regard the abduction experience as a kind of initiation process. Now, it's not one we chose. Although some experiencers apparently claim that looking back, they think that they in a previous lifetime agreed to become abduction experiencers in this present life. I don't know. Think of that. I don't. Members of my family have probably been abducted. That's another topic we might want to get into later. So the possibility that what they're up to is a transformation of consciousness on the part of human beings, with the end result being people becoming less violent and backing off on the planet-destroying weapons, or at least planet-damaging weapons we have, and that this is the process that they are encouraging. Now, when I look around the world, I don't see a lot of evidence that our human behavior has shifted too much in terms of violence.
Yeah, although to our point from the beginning, things are moderately better than they were 50 years ago.
They are moderately better. In fact, this reminds me of something. That, why did the Cold War end? It really goes back to the election of John Paul II as Pope.
Really?
Yeah, this is what Mikhail Gorbachev said. The Soviet Union was collapsing, and after it collapsed, he said it was all because of Pope John Paul II. He was the first pope in 455 years not to be Italian, and he was Slavic. And it came out of nowhere. This guy got elected. No one anticipated a Polish pope. I was, in 1979 or whenever it became pope. It was startling. And he was really smart and had tremendous. Tremendous. My housekeepers are here. So, but he was had a tremendous spiritually powerful man.
Oh, sorry to flag this. Could you just Thank you.
Yeah. He's a very spiritually advanced in many ways. So when in 1981 he visited Poland. Now the Soviets, Brezhnev, and so no one wanted the Catholic Pope be showing up in Poland behind the Iron Curtain, right? But they couldn't stop him. Like 4 million people showed up. It was an incredible event. And what he said to the populace, to his own people, was, "Do not be afraid. Fear not." This is a major theme in the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament. Fear not, right? Because God's power is with you, in effect. Now, what happened after that, this transformation, was that from this came solidarity. The big labor movement in Poland, composed of shipyard workers. Now, imagine in a communist country, the labor unions starting to resist communism. And communism is all about working class, right? And this eventually spread into East Germany and so on. And so by 1990, 91, the whole thing fell apart in 10 years. And it was all because of this spiritual awakening in these people. Now, of course, many of them Poles don't go to church anymore. Partly their religion was also bound up with their anti-communism and so on. But this was an incredible change that came about. This was what ended the Cold War. Because if you read the post-Cold War analyses and post-war analyses, Cold War analyses, no one anticipated the Soviet Union would fall apart. They thought it would take at least another 50 years. And all of a sudden, 8-10 years, the whole thing, so that by the late 80s, I was becoming much less worried about nuclear war. Mikhail Gorbachev was in office, and all this stuff was going on behind the Iron Curtain, glasnost, rethinking of communism, and so on. It all started with Pope John Paul II. Now, this to me is has a spiritual dimension. There's a great biography of him called Messenger of Hope. And in one scene, he's in Poland, I think for his second or third visit, and he's in there with the Polish communist leaders, and some people who were present said these guys are like empty suits. I mean, compared to the charisma of this man and the message he was bringing, don't be afraid of these people, right? And so that's just I think, an important factor in the end of the Cold War and in the end of the nuke. Now, I don't have any idea if aliens were involved with any of this, but it certainly does make me wonder.
And you're drawing the point here, I think, that spiritual intervention can have large-scale effects
absolutely
over time.
Right.
Which
now,
then
we can hope. Can we hope that whatever these initiations we're going through, a lot of people are having, could they have a longer term consequence? We can hope that.
Yeah, let's dial in on that hope a little bit and maybe try to compare it with some alternatives. So, broadly speaking, you could imagine maybe three. One would be a hopeful vision where they're intervening to guide us in positive direction. Another, and this is all, presuming that we're talking about a real phenomenon and not just a, mass hallucination, which I think is an unpersuasive theory. So I'm leaving it to the side.
I agree. Something's really going on.
Okay. I probably should have asked you that to start, but I think we don't need to dial in because I think people who are listening are on that level already.
Right.
Then the second alternative could be, this might be largely a neutral, like fundamentally a neutral interaction, the way that our interactions with dolphin and tuna and chimpanzees are ultimately neutral, although our effects on bunny rabbits maybe tended to skew negative historically. And then the third would be that it's malicious in some way, that it's like extractive, appropriative, controlling, and
demonic.
Demonic. Go ahead.
I just think that has to be out there. That has to be one of the possible considerations. I mean, the world religions, as well as plenty of tribal religions, there's a dark side, according to people throughout history. And I don't know who these entities are. I don't know if they have a demonic aspect. Certainly, some of their behavior seems demonic. In fact, that's a conclusion that John Keel came to. You know who he is, the great.
I haven't read his work, but I'm familiar with the name.
Something of the Trojan UFOs and Trojan horse or something like this. He's very influential. He wasn't for a while because he wasn't big on the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Okay.
He ended up thinking that including these are kind of demonic entities. Now, so there's a whole spectrum of possibilities, from the demonic to the angelic helpful.
And we should complicate this by noting that we've seen so many form factors and different kinds of crafts that it's at least possible, if not very likely, that we're dealing with multiple kinds of beings, which themselves could fall different places on this spectrum.
Right, that's right. I mean, think about this. I mean, not only that. I mean, think of what we haven't mentioned: the Nordic types, the Venusians, the reptilians, I mean, the list goes on, right? I mean, not just Greys, which Whitley focuses on, and which mostly populate the abduction literature, although people report reptilians or other kind of strange entities in abduction contexts. So, we're just scratching the surface now. But here's one of the things that complicates, all this stuff, especially when you're trying to get to any kind of origin story, like where did they come from, right?
Mhm.
There are so many different types of UFO craft. I mean, there's a zillion. There's so many different. I mean, you have your classic this and that, but there's all kind of other kinds. Now, are we talking about being visited by thousands of critters from other planets? Right? I mean, but does it even make any sense? I don't know. So that's another reason to think that it could be, and Valet could say something like this. This is part of the control system. To have all these strange craft. It's not just one simple thing. Classic flying saucers, there's plenty of them. You got your triangles, it goes on and on. You just read the reports that people give us. So what's actually showing up? Are all of these screen memories? Do the craft, whatever they are what are they revealing to us? What is really showing up, and how do they show up for us, and so on. I mean, the whole thing, it's so complicated. As you know, you're a student of this. And yet it's hard to imagine. For me, I just think it's really important that we pay attention to this. And I've been saying this for a long time, but I must admit, I published those 2 articles back in the 80s and 90s. I never heard a word from anybody.
Mm.
Now, the first one in Philosophy Today was a pretty major American philosophy journal. I didn't even get a negative email or letter or anything, like nothing. And so people are mostly prefer not to deal with this because it's just too weird. And I mentioned this the other day to somebody. Said, "What are you working on? You're retired." I said, "Well, I really am back thinking about UAP, UFOs, and alien abduction, and the guys that are retired lawyer. I mean, I don't." He said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah. I mean, stuff's going on." And so many people have so many other things they're worried about. And the way in which we operate now with this cell phone practically planted in our heads, and with the enormous distraction that these provide, our capacity for reflection and sober thought about something so intrusive, I think, has become more limited. I mean, how many people actually read books? I do. I still read tons of books, and I go on and look at stuff. But I find that reading a book is really important because I get a whole complex train of thought in an argument that then gives me a whole window that I didn't have before. What snippets of stuff that I try to patch together on my own. This guy or gal's giving me a whole narrative here that I can now try to place and relate to other ones.
I listen to a lot of books, and I recommend that to people. It's
that's one way to deal with podcasts. Put my phone in my pocket and I go for a walk.
Yeah.
I don't have to be there listening.
It's interesting that the same culture that's brought us these 240 character limits and 30-second video snippets also brought us 3-hour, 48-minute podcasts.
That
somehow people listen to.
People listen, so that people still have some capacity for paying attention, obviously. But this I want to come back to. One of the things that Whitley brings up in the fourth mind here. He says, are we headed to a condition like these critters with AGI? Now, I was writing about this, and I remember reading, because one of my main research topics has been philosophy of technology. One of Heidegger's key contributions, his interpretation of modern technology is one of the most influential in the 20th century. Because what happens throughout Western history is a gradual reduction of all entities to pretty much raw material capable of being used in the process of maximizing power. And that power, the will to power, in fact, has a bunch of stuff on Nietzsche. The will to power is characterized by this fact. It really is a will to will more power because you never have enough. It's like, why does a billionaire need another billion, right? Well, because it's there, right? It's so that the will to power is the will to will. And it's an unstoppable, look what's going on right now. We are in the process of creating non-human intelligence. Musk has got his robot factory, trying to set that up. And we're now working on. Do you use any of these Chat GPTs and other things?
I do, yeah. I spoke
I
with
have
Chat
found
to
it
research
quite
for
useful.
this interview. Yeah,
It's especially useful if you know something about the topic already, because then you can kind of judge, how useful this is.
that's a good
Or if
point.
there's any kind of stuff being made up,
Yeah.
hallucinating or whatever they call it. But one of these hyper intelligent, super intelligent entities, would it be more or less like one of these grays, knowing everything? Right now, this is not. Have you ever read the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yes, big fan. I think I got
Right.
mostly harmless over my shoulder somewhere.
Think about the supercomputer who knows everything. He's bored, right? Isn't that part of his shtick? Right.
This are you talking about the sad robot?
Yeah, in a sense, because
and dealing with ennui
everything.
forever.
There's no surprises. He's seen it all, so that are we about to turn ourselves into what these grays became?
Yeah, that's interesting because it connects to your idea of this this like extraction of novelty, the pursuit of surprise. It also reminds me of a Vonnegut idea of God creating humans in order to experience surprise. That God, gets to watch us do funky things and have a laugh.
Yeah, it is that's the whole question of why, assuming there is a God, there's a source. Why did he need a universe? Right? According to Aristotle, God is completely self-sufficient. And is completely unaware of the world, not interested in it. But we are, because what life forms and so on are about is mimicking God, because God is conceived by Aristotle as this perfect circle, and it's circling around itself in the total self-absorption. So we mimic God by the cycle of life, birth, reproduction, and death. So the cycles of nature, the cycles of the planets, the cycles of the heavenly bodies, all this is where Plato goes into this in a lot of detail. What life is basically erotic. We are drawn erotically to perfect ourselves, to associate, to become more whole, more complex. And so there are people have been thinking about this kind of thing for a long time. What is it all about? And if you're in the theistic tradition, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, why does God create the world? Well, one interpretation has been, Hegel offered this. He said, well, God did not want to just stay static. So he created a world into which he could dive, right? And become involved in the unfolding of the potential of matter energy. And so that for him, Christ's incarnation is the moment in which God intervenes in history and totally empties himself out into history. So God, as a previous abstraction, you see, it's in some sense still there, but the real action is God as human. And Marx picks this up. This is where the man as God in Marx's philosophy.
It sounds like Emerson too, and
there's a lot of Emerson. Well, Nietzsche's a whole overman concept. Emerson anticipates some of that. Nietzsche read a lot of Emerson. So this is a major 18th, 19th, 20th century theme: God in the making. And that these guys in Silicon Valley and the gals in Silicon Valley, it's all about creating God. It's not about the money. You got to have the money to do it, but they got the money. A lot of these guys are rich, but what they want is the extra special step of being the one who hands the baton to the next form of intelligence, post-human. This is technological posthumanism. I wrote a bunch of stuff on this.
Oh, cool! I heard you mention Singularity is Near in another pod, and that's one of my favorite books. I find this area fascinating.
That is a great book, man. Yeah, I'm glad you liked it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it too. I mean, he's a really smart guy. Well, you know what what he said in college when they were graduating from Harvard. People, his buddies were saying, "What do you want to do?" Now that, because these are hotshot Harvard graduates, really smart people. He said, "I want to let the lame walk and the blind see."
Wow.
Right out of the Bible. Right now, what did he have in mind? Well, he became a great inventor. He invented all kind of cool stuff, including stuff for blind people and so on. So he wanted to help transform the human being from its limited, fragile characteristics to one which it increasingly becomes one with these super advanced computers, so that we blend, we merge with them, and so our humanity is taken up into them. Now, here's my argument. This is the bottom line of it all for me. If these grays are in an existential quandary because life hasn't lost its taste, it got like this robot in the Hitchhiker's Guide, right? He's bored, right? Well, what is it? What's essential to human beings? This is what Heidegger said. Essential to human beings is mortality, finitude, and the recognition of it. It's that which gives life its taste. And that if we lose that, then we lose our essential humanity. So the quest for a kind of eternal life outside of doing it on our own with machines he would put it a misguided quest, because we may end up, in other words, not having the capacity to appreciate the extraordinary moments in life, which come only in part because of our awareness of the fragility of everything. If you study Zen, I don't know if you've done any Zen work. I've done a lot of meditation and Buddhist meditation and so on.
Dabbling here. I'm a
but the Zen haiku, the 17-syllable verse, it's often about the special moment. It happens just briefly. But that's the essence of their aesthetic. It is the unanticipated but aesthetically extraordinary moment, brief moment. And that's what life is about. That's what gives it its chase, its meaning. Not the drudgery so much as the opportunity, even in the drudgery, for these moments to come up. This famous Zen koan is that, what is Zen? Chopping wood and carrying water. Everyday life. And living everyday life in such a way that you're attuned to and open to what it presents in an unexpected way. That's what it's all about. Now, if life is about maximizing power so that we gain control of the Milky Way galaxy and expand our intelligence, what is that about, really? What, for beings who have lost their finitude, what's the point, I suppose?
Yeah, that's interesting. I sometimes use end states of the universe as a structure for a thought experiment about values. And the place that has led me, this is pretty far astray here, is that if you pick any one value, you end up in an absurd or dystopic situation where, if it's all happiness, then you just, maximize serotonin throughout the universe or whatever. And if it's all diversity, then everything is different from every other thing. But if it's all stasis, then everything is the same. And if it's so, you need some balance of different values that you like. So we like growth, great, but do we like change? That seems important too. Do we like expansion? Do we want to sustain? It seems like my rough impression of the situation is that we would love some sort of infinite, evolving, pleasurable experience. Like that's something that it doesn't become static.
I can see that. If that would presuppose that you don't have access to the block universe, that you can't see the experience of future already.
Well, it would be about maximizing the pleasure within this block universe in such a way that it didn't become dull, which is an interesting, this idea of boredom that you've brought up a couple times.
That's a thought experiment. There's a philosophers, one of the cool things about philosophy, and by the way, I have often heard from people, and I tell them I'm a philosophy professor, they would say to me, I took a philosophy course once and it really sucked. And man, it really hurts because philosophy is so cool.
Yeah.
This is an indictment of the profession. If you can't have students leave your class turned on by philosophy, then you're failing. Because I remember I taught for several instances of philosophy and science fiction course at UC Boulder, and man, it was
Cool.
great. We read all kind of stuff. There's so many cool things to think about. But well, are we nearing the end of our?
Yes, I guess we should. But I while we're still in philosophy, ether, I just want to push you on one more just broad philosophical instead of going alien. If you're hinging this concept of authenticity on finitude, how would a spiritual existence complicate that picture for you? Like if you found out that your physical life was just one instantiation of a soul that's been going for thousands or millions of years, how would that make you feel about the inherent authenticity deriving from finitude?
Well, that's a big question, isn't it?
Thank you.
I think the bottom line has to do with something like cosmic love. I mean, I think that's what these mystics and so on experiences, and also in the near-death experience, which has a lot of commonalities with the alien abduction. It turns out that there's some transformation which has to do with being reunited with cosmic source love, and that's so intrinsically satisfying that the quest for novelty then becomes goes by the boards, because novelty is a momentary encounter with something special, and now you're absorbed in it, the special, and so it's not something else that you're craving. There's a couple of great lines. One is that you can never get enough of what you don't really want.
Whoa.
And you can buy a ton of cocaine, but at the end of the day, that wasn't it either, right?
Yeah.
That's the other one. There's only one thing worse than not having what you want.
Getting what you want.
Because that wasn't it either.
Yeah.
Now, so the God promise is that this is what you really want. And that's eternal cosmic love. Right? This is what these traditions are about, right? Now, the way in which they go about recruiting followers and so on, it's a pretty dark human process at times. Religion as an institutional formation has got some real problems. But the insight, I think the experiential part of it, I think it's pretty right on in terms of what my conviction is, that the universe is a manifestation of something beyond our ability to comprehend, but can be tasted, and that's what these NDE experiences bring back with them in many cases. They were headed toward the light, right? Not just another cool thing. So may it be so.
I guess I should let you go. Can I just rimshot one quick question about the experiences? And you can answer this as shortly as you would like. Do you think we should attempt to communicate if we do think there might be some non-human intelligence? Do you think we should reach out?
We should try to understand, and that's what they're the things that both Jacques Vallée and Whitley Strieber and others say. It's so hard to communicate with them. I mean, they think differently. They're symbolic. I mean, the whole thing is clearly we're coming at each other in ways that make communication really difficult, and it doesn't help that they don't speak. So he's hoping for some kind of reconciliation, but to some extent, sometimes I think he's pipe dreaming. How are you going to have the Air Force admit that they've been in league with these people for generations? Because they made them be that way. I mean, the Air Force is powerless against these entities. And how could you ever have disclosure about that? Talk about a sense of betrayal, and then what are these critters really after? How would we ever come to any kind of agreed upon social ontology in which we have some kind of relationship with them? And the fear, the terror, the anger, the human emotions, you can see why there's hesitation about disclosure.
Yeah, I'm dealing with a little frustration at them now too. I've been through my phase of being upset at the military. I am still, but I'm also a little frustrated with whoever's outside the stream looking in at us
That's
fish.
right. That's right. That Whitley says in his most recent book, he said, look, they could make disclosure happen anytime they want, but they're not ready to do that. And
So
that creates all kind of other problems. But anyway, you'll have to read some chapter in my book about this.
I'll let you get back to writing it, and everybody should keep an eye on the shelves for when that gets published.
Take a little while to get this thing done, but I'm working on it.
Well, we're cheering you on from afar. Is there a place where you like people to interact with your work online, or are you sort of off the internet these days?
Well, you can go to my blog site.
Oh, great.
SUAPS. They have a blog for everybody who belongs to the organization, and I publish 4 or 5 pieces there. There's a place you can leave comments. I'm happy to interact with people. I'm a professor, retired, but I like to talk to people and share ideas and turn people onto alternatives and learn alternatives.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your ideas and your time with us today. I'm very grateful.
I really enjoyed it, Caleb. Thank you. Good interview.
And that's the show. Thank you for watching or listening. If you'd like to subscribe to the show, you can do that on patreon.com/WTUFO or on YouTube or on Buzzsprout. You can support us for as much or as little per month as you would like to. We really appreciate anything that you can contribute. Also, you can check out Spacefair's shop at spacefair.etsy.com. Thank you again for watching or listening. I hope you have a beautiful day.